The princess was dying on a transit platform, and every Vialethi in the station stood at a careful distance of exactly 3 body lengths. Callahan noticed the distance first, that perfect, practiced ring of stillness. 200 iridescent bodies, arranged like a held breath around something on the floor. He was still pulling his supply cart through the gate when he registered the sound underneath the crowd hum. A thin, wet clicking that his hindbrain catalogued before his forebrain had caught up. Airway compromise, partial obstruction, and the clock running. He left the cart. He pushed through. The Vialethi parted for him with a kind of horrified precision, stepping back to maintain their 3 body-length margin even as he moved forward, so that the ring simply expanded around him. He didn't think about this. He was looking at the figure on the ground. She was young, he'd learn later how to read Vialethi age. But something in the proportions of her, the not quite finished quality of her plating, told him what human instinct always knows. This is a child. Her chitin was the deep blue violet of a storm coming in from the sea. One of her lower limbs was folded wrong beneath her. Her mandibles were working in that clicking, labored rhythm, and the spiracles along her thorax were flaring and collapsing with the desperate effort of breathing through something that wasn't letting air through. He got his kit open. He talked to her while he worked, not because he expected her to understand standard, but because talking helped him think, and because silence felt wrong, and because she was frightened, and he could see it in the way her compound eyes tracked him with that terrible, unfocused brightness of a person trying very hard not to lose consciousness. "Okay," he said. "Hi, I'm Callahan. I'm a medic. I'm going to figure out what's happening, and I'm going to fix it, and I need you to keep breathing for me. Can you do that? Just keep going." She kept going. The obstruction was partial, something she'd aspirated, caught in the upper part of the tracheal equivalent, not fully blocking but swelling fast around it. The tissue response of an allergic reaction or a stress response, or something he didn't have a name for yet because he'd only been treating humans for the past 8 years, and Vialethi anatomy was a chapter in a textbook. He'd read twice on the transit over. He knew the spiracle system. He knew the approximate location of the primary respiratory ganglion. He knew that the clicking meant she was compensating, and that compensation had a time limit. He found the swelling. He reduced it with the closest thing in his kit to a broad-spectrum anti-inflammatory, and prayed to no one in particular that Vialethi histamine response was close enough to the model he was working from. The clicking slowed, deepened, became, slowly, something that sounded like breathing. He sat back on his heels and let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. The ring of Vialethi had not moved. 200 beings, iridescent in the station's amber light, watching him with the particular stillness of a species that communicates in pheromones, and had just produced, collectively, a great quantity of something he couldn't smell at all. He looked up. He was completely alone, in the center of their circle. One of them stepped forward a single step, precise and deliberate, breaking the ring. Her plating was a deep amber gold, older-looking, and she held herself with the particular quality of someone who had authority over their own discomfort. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back. "Is she going to be all right?" he asked. The Vialethi made a sound he couldn't parse. Then, in careful, slightly archaic standard, "Who are you to ask?" He looked down at the girl, whose breathing had steadied, whose lower limb was going to need setting before she could walk on it, who had fallen asleep with the specific boneless quality of a body that had stopped fighting and was now just resting. A piece of her plating had a crack in it along the thorax. He'd need to look at that. "Her medic," he said, "for now." The amber gold Vialethi was quiet for a long time. "My name is Scifi," she said. "Station warden. You will come with me." It did not sound like a request. He looked at the girl. "She needs to come too. That limb needs setting." Scifi's mandibles moved in a way he would later learn meant something like, "This human is going to be a problem." "Yes," she said. "She will come." The summons arrived before he'd finished washing the princess's blood off his hands. Scifi brought it herself, a small, flat object that hummed at a frequency Callahan could feel in his back teeth, and stood in the doorway of the station medical bay, while he cleaned up with the particular expression of someone managing a situation they had not prepared for. "The Queen requests your presence," she said. "I'm almost done." He held his hands under the sanitizer until the light turned green. "Give me 5 minutes. I want to check her limb again." "The Queen," Sethire said carefully. "The patient's 8 years old." He was estimating on the 8. He'd revised the anatomy chapter in his head twice while setting the limb, and her plating-to-body ratio suggested somewhere in that range. The bone equivalent is going to want to shift. "It'll take 2 minutes." Sethire made a sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite a click. She stepped aside to let him pass. The princess was awake. She was sitting up in the medical bay's adjustable cradle, which Callahan had reconfigured with a rolled thermal blanket because the default angle was wrong for her body geometry, and she was watching him approach with those compound eyes that didn't track quite like human eyes. Not moving, just suddenly focused, the way a lamp brightens. "Hi," he said. "How's the leg?" She clicked at him. He'd been picking up sounds, not language yet, not really. But he was starting to build a rough phonemic inventory the way he always did when he was somewhere new, cataloging what he heard and filing it against context. This click, he thought, probably meant fine, or okay, or acceptable. It was the same click she'd made when he'd gotten the swelling under control. He checked the limb. The bone equivalent had held. He reinforced the brace, and she watched him the whole time, with that bright, still attention. "You're going to need to keep this immobilized for..." He looked at Sethire. "How long does Vailithi bone take to set?" "That varies by caste," Sethire said, and then immediately seemed to regret having said it. And then seemed to decide she'd already said it. 12 cycles for her. 12 cycles. He filed that. He told the princess. 12 cycles. That's the rule. She clicked. He was fairly sure that one was not fine or okay or acceptable. "I know," he said. "It's annoying, but the bone needs it." She clicked again, shorter, and then did something with her free upper limb. A small gesture, deliberate, that he didn't know yet. "She is thanking you," Sethire said quietly, from the door. "It is not a gesture she does not do that with strangers." He nodded to the princess. She held his gaze for another moment, then looked away with the regal ease of someone who had decided the conversation was complete on her terms. The royal chamber was 3 levels up and entirely unlike the rest of the station, which had the pleasant functionality of a working transit hub. Here, everything was mineral walls grown from what looked like compressed crystal, amber, and dark violet, catching the light and fracturing it into something almost warm. The floor was the same material. There was no furniture in the human sense, but there were levels platforms at varying heights, and on the highest, resting in a configuration that used all 6 limbs, in a way Callahan's brain kept trying to parse as sitting, but wasn't quite, was the Queen. She was larger than the Vailithi he'd seen in the station. Not dramatically, but she filled the space differently, the way a person does when they've spent decades being the most important being in any room they enter. Her plating was the deep violet black of deep water. Her compound eyes, when they fixed on him, were the same color as her daughter's. And he understood suddenly, and with some force, that this was the mother of the child he'd spent the last hour with. He'd been briefed, in the elevator, by Sethire, in the staccato shorthand of someone delivering information under time pressure. The princess, the caste laws, the touching, the number of violations, which Sethire had stopped counting at 6 because counting seemed to be distressing her. He understood, more or less, that he had done something that was either a tremendous act of mercy or a tremendous act of transgression, and that which one it was had not yet been decided. He met the Queen's eyes. Vailithi didn't look away from things that mattered to them. He'd picked that up too. She looked back. Sethire, beside him, made a very small sound of alarm. "You're supposed to," she started. "I know," he said. He didn't look away. "She's looking at me." "You are not supposed to." "Is she going to hurt me for looking at her?" A pause. "No." "Then I'm going to look at her." The Queen's mandibles moved. The court, and there was a court. He registered it now. Dozens of Vilithi arranged in the peripheral architecture of the room went very still. Then in standard that was better than Sethure's, lower and more deliberate. "Sit." He sat, cross-legged on the crystal floor, which was cooler than he'd expected, and slightly uncomfortable against his knees, but manageable. He pulled out a protein bar from his kit pocket. It was a reflex. He always ate something after a high-stress treatment, and then registered the room looking at him and paused. "Sorry," he said. "Want one?" He held it out toward the Queen. The court produced a collective sound he had no frame for. The Queen regarded the protein bar. Then she regarded him. Then, slowly and with great consideration, she said, "No. They're actually terrible," he said. "I don't know why I keep carrying them." The court was still making that sound. He was starting to think it might be the Valithi equivalent of strangled laughter, but he wasn't sure enough to act on that. The Queen watched him eat. He watched her back. There was something he noticed it the way he always noticed injuries. A pattern his eye caught and catalogued before his brain had a name for it. Something in the way she held her left mandible. The faintest asymmetry. A hesitation in the way it moved when she spoke. A micro-tension in the plates. Along her jaw equivalent. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Sethure made that sound again. He was going to start thinking of it as her sound. It meant, he thought, not this again. "You may ask," the Queen said. "Your left mandible. Is it injured? Or is that—" He searched for diplomatic phrasing and found none. "It moves differently than the right one." The court went very, very quiet. The Queen was still for a long moment. Then, "It was damaged some months ago. One. Has anyone looked at it?" "I am the Queen." He turned that over. "Right. So that's a no." He set down the protein bar wrapper. "I could look at it, if you wanted." The silence stretched out long enough that he started to think he'd finally crossed the line. There was a line somewhere. He could feel it the way you feel, the edge of a table in the dark. And he'd been navigating toward it this whole conversation. Then the Queen said, "You will stay." It was not a request. He looked at Sethure, who had the expression of someone who has just survived a very near miss and isn't sure yet what the vehicle was. "Okay," he said. "But I'll need my kit." He'd been at court for 6 days before he understood what "the Queen wants him" actually meant. The first 3 days were a process of adjustment. He slept in a room that was the right temperature but the wrong geometry built for 6-limbed bodies, with resting platforms that his 2-limbed body couldn't use. So he made a nest of the thermal blankets from his pack on the floor, and that was fine. He'd slept in worse. He ate his own supplies because the court food was designed for Valithi digestive systems, which processed minerals his stomach would object to. And the one time he'd been offered something he thought might be vegetable adjacent, Sethure had very quietly talked him out of trying it. Sethure became, by around day 2. She brought him to his sessions with the Queen. There were sessions, formal and structured, at which he was ostensibly learning court protocol, which he was terrible at, and at which he got the sense that the Queen was not particularly bothered by his being terrible at it. At meals, Valithi meals, which were elaborate pheromone-coded social rituals that he participated in by sitting still and trying not to accidentally communicate anything, she sat beside him and murmured context. On the second evening, she told him, unprompted, that the word for the clicking sound that meant something like acceptable was the same sound that meant the rain has stopped, which she said with the slight embarrassed emphasis of someone sharing a piece of their language they found beautiful. He said he thought that was a beautiful coincidence. She said it wasn't a coincidence when rain stopped, You could go outside again, and that was acceptable. And the sound had started in one place and ended up covering both. He thought about that for a long time. The Queen's mandible was a joint injury, old and improperly healed. He told her this on day 3, sitting across from her in the crystal chamber with his kit open between them. Which felt strange, and also felt completely natural, the way it always felt when the work was what mattered, and everything else was just backdrop. She held perfectly still while he examined it with the precision tools from the kit and the second-hand anatomy knowledge that he'd been supplementing, in the evenings, by reading everything he could pull from the station's cultural archive on Vialethi biology. "Why hasn't anyone treated this?" he asked. "I did not ask." "Did you need to ask?" A pause. "No, but if I did not ask, it did not need to be addressed." He sat back. Outside the chamber, the station hummed. "That seems lonely," he said. The Queen's mandibles moved the good one and the injured one, together, in a motion he hadn't seen before. "You are a peculiar being, Callahan. I've been told." He packed the first treatment kit. "I'll need to see it again tomorrow. The tissue needs to relearn the movement. And the day after? Probably. And the one after that? Then you will stay," she said. And this time it was less decree and more something else. Something he didn't have a word for in Standard or in the fragments of Vialethi he was collecting. On day 4, he found Sethere in the undercourt, the lower levels of the station, service corridors, and mechanical spaces that the transit hub still used, trying to tell him something she wasn't saying directly. She'd been like this since morning, circling something, and he'd learned her tells by now. The way her free upper limbs moved when she was deciding how much to say. "Something's wrong," he said. "There are members of the court," she said carefully, "who are concerned about the disruption to caste order. Because of me. Because of what you represent. A being who does not observe the hierarchy. Who touches without consideration of register." Her mandibles moved. "Who offers protein bars to the Queen?" That was a gesture of, "I know what it was. They do not." She was quiet for a moment. "There are those who believe your continued presence here poses a risk to the structure of the court, and there are means available to concerned parties that do not require the Queen's direct knowledge." He was quiet for a moment. "So I should leave." "There is a transit in 6 hours. I can arrange." "What happens if I stay?" "I don't know. But I know what happens to disruptions to caste order." Her compound eyes were steady on him. "I am telling you this because you set my niece's limb," she said. "She is the princess. I did not tell you before because I thought you might behave differently if you knew. Would she have been less worth helping?" Sethere made her sound the not quite sigh, not quite click. "No. But I wanted to observe the version of you that didn't know." She paused. "I have been observing you for 6 days. I would like the version of you to continue to exist." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Okay, let's go." They went down. The undercourt was different from the upper levels, functional and close. Mineral walls rougher. Less light. Workers moved through it in the pheromone-coated silence of caste-low Vialethi, and Callahan moved through it with Sethere at his side. And they were making time. They were going to make the transit if they kept pace. And then he heard it. The sound was a very specific sound. He knew it the way he knew the clicking in a compromised airway, the way he knew the particular quality of someone breathing wrong. It was the sound a person makes when they are trying not to make any sound at all, when the pain has reached the point where silence itself takes effort. He stopped. "Callahan," Sethere said. He was already moving toward it. The worker was in a side corridor, low caste, by the simplified plating, a maintenance worker by the tools scattered around them. One of their mid-limbs was crushed under a piece of fallen conduit, the kind of structural housing that lined the mechanical corridors, and the worker was holding very, very still in the way that meant they had done the math on what trying to move would cost. "Hey," Callahan said. He got down beside them. "Hey, I'm here. Okay?" The worker looked at him. There was no standard there, he could see it in the eyes. The way the compound focus adjusted, and didn't quite land on him the way the princesses had, the way Cytherea's did. "Cythere," he said, "can you tell them I'm going to get this off them? That it's going to hurt? And then it's going to be better?" Cythere clicked something. The worker's spiracles flared. "Tell them I need them to breathe through it," Callahan said. "Callahan, the transit. Tell them to breathe." The conduit came up. The worker made the sound they'd been holding back. Short and sharp. And Callahan held the weight until he could slide the limb out. And then he let it down carefully and got his kit open, and the worker watched him with the same bright, unfocused attention the princess had. And he talked while he worked. Same as always. Because silence felt wrong. The limb was broken but not crushed. The conduit had caught the joint, not the bone itself. He could brace it. He stripped the sleeve from his jacket to make the brace tighter. The soft material working better than his kit's standard wrap for the particular angle of the joint. And the worker clicked at him several times. And he said, "You're welcome, I think," and finished, tying it off. He sat back. Cythere was very quiet behind him. "The transit," he said. "Is gone," she said. 12 minutes ago. He looked at his hands, wrapped in the worker's equivalent of blood, a darker fluid than he'd expected, violet-black like the queen's plating. He looked at the worker, who was testing the brace with small, careful movements. He looked at his jacket sleeve, now a splint. He looked up. The queen was standing at the corridor entrance. Not Cytherea's handlers, not a court escort, the queen herself. 6 limbs, deep water plating, the particular quality of the most important being in any room. She must have followed them. She had been watching for some time, he thought, from the way she held herself, the stillness of someone who had already processed what they were seeing. The court, when they learned about it later, would say she had come to stop him from leaving. That was mostly true. She looked at the worker. She looked at Callahan. She looked at his jacket sleeve tied around a maintenance worker's limb. She crossed the corridor and folded her 6 limbs down into the crouch that Vialethi used when they wanted to be at the level of someone smaller than them. And she looked at him directly. "You could have made the transit," she said. "He needed help. You did not know him." "No," he agreed. She was quiet. Outside, the station hummed its steady background hum. The worker had stopped moving and was watching the queen with an expression Callahan couldn't read, but didn't need to. "The mandible," the queen said finally. "You said it would take several more days." "Yeah. Then you will need to stay." He looked at his hands. At the sleeve of his kit. At the worker who was breathing steadily now. At Cythere, who was doing the Vialethi equivalent of pressing her lips together very hard. "I'll need my kit," he said. The queen's left mandible moved and the right one moved with it, matching it, the first time he'd seen them move together without hesitation. She was quiet for a moment, that had weight to it. Then, in a voice low enough that only he and Cythere heard it, "Could you also look at it now? It has been several months, is a long time to hold something still." He reached into his kit. The worker beside him clicked something short and soft, the same sound. He was fairly sure, as the princess had made. "The rain has stopped, and that is acceptable, and you can go outside again." "Yeah," Callahan said. "I can look at it now." He opened the kit on the floor of the undercourt. The queen of the Vialethi crouched beside him in the mineral light, and he got to work.